Good. Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for joining us today on a very, very important topic. I want to take a moment to certainly thank the entire Leadership Council, the co-chairs, Gail Everett and Kurt Small. I don't know if they are with us here today, but I certainly want to thank them for their commitment to working with me as we drive forward the vision of the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights. Certainly, I want to thank you, Jeffrey, and Nisa and Nicolo for the work that all of you are doing in this very initiative. As you all know, about a year and a half ago, Carrie had asked me to step up and chair the Leadership Council, and I had committed to her that I would do so if, in fact, we moved forward on some initiative that could have an everlasting impact and could align with the vision and legacy of Robert F. Kennedy. And we landed on workplace dignity. And whoever thought that a year and a half later, the initiative would be so important in our society in a COVID-19 environment. I've had the opportunity over the last number of months to speak with a lot of CEOs who are struggling, quite honestly, with the understanding of workplace dignity. How do you manage remotely? How do you really escalate that sense of compassion? And today we have with us an expert. If you have not had the chance to read Donna Hicks' book, Leading with Dignity, as I shared with her at the opening here, it is by far one of the best books that I've ever have had a chance to read and to implement and to understand how important it is to use tenderness first to gain trust, and then you can be tenacious in terms of your policies within an organization. So we're going to hear from Donna today, and I thank you, Donna, for joining us. But before I hand this back to Jeffrey, Robert Kennedy often quoted from the French philosopher Camus, and one of his favorite quotes was the following, quote, "Perhaps we cannot prevent this world from being a world in which children are tortured, but we can reduce the number of tortured children." In many respects, this is what our mission is. And what I like to do is modify that quote. Perhaps we cannot prevent our society from being a society in which individuals are not feeling a sense of connection, but we can reduce the number of unconnected people. Colleagues, we are living at a time right now where loneliness and social isolation, not just in our society, is at an all-time high. It's also in the workplace. People are feeling disconnected. And Donna, you speak so much about the three venues of connections. And I think this group today will benefit from understanding how can we lead effectively in this remote workplace and feel this sense of connection. So thank you all for being here today. And your attendance is in itself an indication that you recognize that this is a very important issue and opportunity for all of us. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Donato. Thank you for your leadership, and both within RFK Human Rights and with the greater world around us, and particularly for your support and the Tramuto Foundation's support of our Workplace Dignity Program. I lead the Workplace Dignity Program at Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights. My background is as an employment lawyer who also had the good fortune to lead global inclusion and diversity initiatives at various Wall Street and technology companies. And I'm thrilled to be in an organization that is, bridging the values that underlie human rights work to the workplace through a focus on dignity. I want to give a shout out to some of our new partners who are joining the call today, other people who are in the field doing this work, like the folks at Global Dignity, Michael Person at Fordham, and of course, Donna, who is with us today. I've gotten to know Donna over the course of my work experience here at RFK Human Rights. She's become a friend, even though we are remote friends, trying our best in our own relationship together to demonstrate some remote humanity. So if we could just pause for a minute and hear from Donna and have her introduce herself and some of her own connection to this work and the values around dignity. Thanks, Donna.
Oh, thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you, Donato. I'm just thrilled to be here because, in fact, my career started out in one of the most poignant parts of my career was doing human rights education for an organization that worked in Cambodia along with the United Nations program there called UNTAC, United Nations Transitional Authority in Cambodia, during the time when they were transitioning from Pol Pot and the ravages of that and the indignities that were left behind with that genocide. And what we tried to do was to educate people about what dignity meant, what their human rights actually meant, and the role that dignity played. Since that time, I became the program director at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard. I've done international conflict resolution work for the last 20 years, 25 years now. And what I learned over the time that I was facilitating these dialogues all over the world, in part with parties in conflict, is that dignity was always in the room, but nobody was talking about it. It was the second conversation and the unspoken conversation that was taking place at every single one of the negotiating tables. They were talking about all of the politics and how we had to solve this problem, that problem. But I recognized that underlying all these issues were deep, deep wounds and assaults to their dignity. So over the years, I just decided it was my job. It was my job to figure out how to operationalize dignity, how to make it real, how to make it actionable so everybody would be able to understand it. So and as Donato said, I wrote Leading with Dignity after spending a fair amount of time in the corporate world, having been invited in when they realized, gee, maybe our conflicts in the corporate world had their roots in dignity, that maybe the employees were really, really unhappy and didn't feel like they were being treated well. So that was after my first book, which is Dignity, Its Essential Role in Playing in Resolving Conflict. So I'm just thrilled to be here with Jeffrey and Donato and everyone else here at the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Organization, and I have such deep respect for it, and I feel it's an honor to be here with all of you.
Thank you so much, Donna. And one thing just logistically I wanted to mention is we do have a Q&A tab at the bottom of most people's screens, I think. And so we will have a Q&A at the end, and we'll do our best to make sure we have a good amount of time for that. We want this to be a conversation as much as it can be, given the setup. And so if you drop comments in there, we can get to them later. And certainly we'll exchange our information at the end, and people can reach out to us after the fact. It's a conversation that shouldn't just end with the hour that we have today. I'm just going to share my screen now. And so for as we go through a few slides, our images will be reduced a little bit, but we thought having some content would be helpful to share. And I just wanted to start here with a summary of our Workplace Dignity Program. I mentioned that I lead our Workplace Dignity Program. And here we have just a lot of words, I know, for a presentation, but I thought it would be helpful for you just to be able to glance over it. And it makes the point that part of what we're trying to do is connect our legacy human rights work and the values that underlie it to the workplace. And what we'll talk about in this discussion is how honoring dignity is the vehicle by which we can bring those values into the workplace. They are not sort of shoehorned into a workplace, a human rights organization. They're integral to it because human rights don't end at the workplace door, and that's something that we'll talk about. In the coming months, what you'll see from us in this program are actionable tools and content for organizations themselves and their leaders and other managers that give them the resources to make honoring dignity actionable. Just as we talk about in other aspects of society and other organizational structures, there are things that individuals can do, but there also are systems, policies, practices that have to be weighed into the equation. You can't just expect a manager to solve the day, just as you can't expect a police chief to solve the day. There are systems, structures, and processes that exist in any organization that have to be tackled directly, rethought, to enable dignity to flourish in that environment. So that's a big part of what you'll see from our work in the coming months. We're also focused on giving voice to those who are close to the issues and to the problems. We don't presume to own the space of workplace dignity. That's why we rely on folks like Donna. But we also know that there are people out there every day in different workplaces confronting different issues, all of which need to be given voice to really help make a focus on dignity systemic and to drive change more broadly. So those are some of the things that we're most focused on. For our agenda today, we'll talk a little bit about the foundation for dignity in the workplace. We'll then talk to the meat of the issue, which is the remote, or what I also call the uncertain workplace, because we continue to wonder, like, what are we really going to? We don't really know the answer to that. So part of the opportunity for us is, what can we do in the meantime and along the way to really inject a measure of humanity into the relationships we have in the workplace? And then recognizing that the opportunity to work from home is an extraordinary privilege. It's a privilege that does not apply to 40% of the working population in the United States, and we'll come back to that. So given that reality, and given the privilege that we have to be talking about these issues in this way, how can we think about honoring the dignity of people who are in workplaces other than our own, who are working in a physical place right now, often helping us make our lives a little bit easier? And we'll talk about that, and then we'll have some Q&A. So I mentioned before that honoring dignity is the vehicle by which we make real the idea that human rights don't end at the workplace door. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights protects our dignity, which we view as our inherent value and worth. We all possess it, we're all born with it, no one can take it away from us. The UDHR also makes a commitment to just and favorable conditions of work. And when you think about it, the UDHR, which is sort of our constitution, if you will, as it relates to human rights work, it makes sense that it would include the workplace. We spend at least a third of our life at work, maybe more, maybe a lot more for some people. So work, therefore, becomes a major source of dignity in our lives. Or if how we interact with each other and how we treat others is not dignity advancing or dignity honoring, it can be a major source of dishonor and indignity in our lives. The reality is, a lot of organizations may be talking about dignity and have other organizational values that are put in a mission statement or perhaps on a wall. But true meaning to what honoring dignity means in a workplace is not often discussed. And what employees often feel can be quite disconnected from what leaders believe. And we came to really understand this with greater clarity by work we did at RFK Human Rights with Willis Towers Watson. And earlier this year, Willis published a study based on a very broad survey of executives and employees around the globe that focused on workplace dignity and the recognition to many of the survey respondents that it will increasingly matter in the years to come. But as it relates to that perception gap, I just wanted to point out two statistics, and then I'm going to turn it over to Donna to talk about some more of the foundation. And this is the perception gap between what senior leaders think and what their employees are really feeling. So point one, almost 80% of senior leaders believed that they were encouraging their employees to speak up about issues. But only half of employees agree with that. 80% approximately versus 50%. The other statistic was that 77% of employers believe that when employees do a good job, they're recognized for their contributions, they're acknowledged. Only 60% of employees felt that. And so there's a gap between the lived experience of employees at large and the more senior leaders, which presents a great opportunity for a dignity-conscious organization to make a difference. And with that, I'll turn it over to Donna, who will talk a little bit about dignity itself, the understanding of it, what a dignity-conscious organization is, and then importantly, what are some of the key elements of honoring dignity. And Donna, just let me know when you want me to advance the slide.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey. That's a perfect introduction to what I'm about to say about dignity. First of all, let me just be clear what we're talking about. Dignity is, as Jeff noted in a previous slide, dignity is our inherent value and worth. Every single one of us was born with dignity, but we're not necessarily born knowing how to act like it. And that's a subject for the next slide. But it is our inherent value and worth. And whenever I give presentations, I always put up a slide of a newborn infant, a baby, and say to people, look, is there any question whether this child has inborn value and worth? And in fact, I say, we would easily say that these infants are invaluable, priceless, and irreplaceable. So dignity is the baseline. It's what we're all born with. We're all in this same dignity value. Every single one of us has it. And at the same time, people always say that dignity and respect are the same thing. Now, I argue very strongly that dignity is different from respect. That dignity, as I said, is our baseline. We're all born with it. Everybody shares that same human value. At the same time, I think that when people confuse dignity and respect, it is really, it makes for some confusion that I don't think that really needs to be clarified. Because I believe that respect has to be earned. If I say I respect someone, then that means that that person has done something really extraordinary, really incredible. But with dignity, you don't have to do anything. It is just part of our DNA. It's part of what it means to be human. So when I say I respect somebody, I'm looking at, wow, what did that person do? He or she earned that status of having my respect. I admire that person so much. I want to be like that person. So I just think it's really important to clarify that, because when you hear the word dignity, you're always going to hear dignity and respect as if it's one word. But number one thing, takeaway here, separate those two. They're different. And I want to say also that it's really important with dignity to recognize that even though we are all born with it, this is something that is really not part of the consciousness of very many people. I go around the world talking about this work. I've done this research for the last 20 years about what dignity is and what it isn't. And I think it's really important to recognize that most people, the vast majority of people, really educated, smart people with whom I work when I consult in organizations, haven't even thought about dignity, not to mention the role it plays in our lives and our relationships and in our organization. So I want to be mindful of the fact that the ignorance gap here is something that we really have to address. And this is why I think education around dignity is so important. And I think in all aspects of organizational culture, we need to know the facts about dignity. And the other thing about a dignity-conscious organization that I wanted to point out, there is a paradigm shift going on in the world today around what the objectives are in our business paradigms. In the old days, it was all about shareholder profits and maximization of wealth. Well, now there's a whole group of business ethicists. Michael Pearson was mentioned earlier by Jeffrey, where they are trying to shift the focus of that paradigm, and instead of having the maximization of wealth and shareholder profits, what they're looking for is to make it more human-centric and to have the paradigm shift from that objective to looking for ways to enhance the well-being of employees and everyone else down the supply chain. So this paradigm shift, I think, is really remarkable because it's not a technical fix. It's not new technology that you can add to your business plan. This is about understanding something deep and inside us about what it means to be human, how we as leaders have a responsibility to promote that sense of well-being and dignity in our people, and how to go about doing that and educating ourselves so that we can make this new paradigm a way of life in the business community. And so, you know, again, it's not a technical fix. This is something that every leader needs to study, just like we learn everything else. You go and get your MBA and other degrees. Well, we need a degree in dignity. We need a degree in what it means to honor dignity and what that looks like. Fortunately, I have done a lot of that work over the last 20 years. And so I'm going to be presenting that to you in a minute. But I want to say one thing about the shift from shareholder profits to the more human-centered, dignity-centered concerns in the workplace. What my colleagues have discovered is that they've done a lot of research on this idea of making dignity the center of their business concerns. What they've discovered is that when the organizations have made dignity their focus, several outcomes happened that were really surprising. Number one, it increased employee engagement. Number two, people felt more willing to give of discretionary energy. They felt more loyal to the company. A big important, not really important one, it decreased the turnover rate, because we all know how costly it is to have to keep retraining people. And of course, you know, the other thing that we like to mention last, because we think that this is just such an important concept to know, you know, ethically, is to treat people with dignity. But last but not least, it also increases profits. So this is like, to me, this is a no-brainer for people in leadership positions that try to leverage this. Let's get this dignity education in our organizations so that people feel seen, they feel heard, they feel recognized, they feel responded to if they have a grievance, they feel safe, all of these things. Let's leverage this and make this the central part of a dignity culture. All right, so let's just get down to something really concrete. What is it? I did research for the last 15, 20 years, asking people all over the world how they would like to be treated if they were treated with dignity. I asked these very same questions no matter whether I was in Asia, Africa, North America, South America, Europe. I asked all the same questions, and there were 10 themes that came out of what people wanted if they were to be treated with dignity. First one, acceptance of identity. No matter your race, your religion, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your age, no matter what, we all want to be treated with dignity. And the thing of it is, in the business community, I think is important to know that we may differ in status. We have different power arrangements, but at the end of the day, we're all equal in dignity. And recognition, I mean, these are all common sense. People look at these things and they say, oh yeah, this is common sense. People want recognition, they want acknowledgement, they want to be included, they want safety, they want fairness, they want independence, et cetera, et cetera. But you know what? Even though this sounds like common sense, it's not common knowledge. This is why I'm hearkening back to this idea of dignity education. And it's part of human rights education too, understanding how to do this, how to treat people this way. And I want to tell you a quick story. When I first went into the corporate world, it was an enormous company, and I would have these 10 elements of dignity and do my little dignity education seminar 101 for everybody. And I would ask them, okay, here are the 10 elements of dignity. Which element do you think is most often violated in your organization? And to my shock, 80% of the respondents, and we're talking about a few thousand people here, 80% of the respondents said safety was the most violated element. And what do they mean by safety? You know, not physical safety, but certainly that's important, but more psychological safety. And specifically, they said they don't feel safe to speak up if something bad happens to them. So if they feel like their dignity is being violated, they're terrified to speak to their boss about it. And if he or she was the perpetrator of the violation, there's just such an aversion to speaking up, because they would say to me, Donna, that's career suicide. I'd never go and tell my boss that he or she violated my dignity. And, you know, another person said, look, I won't get a good performance review. And furthermore, I mean, one of the biggest worries was, I may lose my job if I speak up. So you can see how the culture of indignity has permeated through so many organizations, and not because there's bad people at the helm. I'm telling you, these are people who just have never been exposed. These leaders have just never been exposed to dignity, and we got to take the shame out of it. We just have to make sure they get to the point where they understand it and they're able to make it actionable in their work environments.
Thank you, Donna. I think, and it ties back really well to the point we made earlier about that perception gap. If you remember a few minutes ago, we were talking about how what employers believe and what employees feel differs. And one of the things that bears out to the research that Donna's done is this concern about safety, this being comfortable in speaking up without fear of humiliation or being embarrassed or degraded in some way. Amy Edmondson, who's across Cambridge from Donna at Harvard Business School, has talked about this a lot for years, and we've been grateful for the conversations we've had with her as our own work has developed. And I think also when we think about the kind of COVID-19 world that we're in, the issue of physical safety also becomes really important and really crucial when employees are concerned about going back to workplaces where physical safety, people might call it OSHA type issues in the United States, become more of a concern, let alone people who are on the front lines right now and continuing to report to work. That becomes a big dignity issue as well. Just in terms of some data, hold on one second, there we go. We were able to look at some data from a Prudential Morning Consult survey that went out in May, and they repeated in June with sort of consistent results. And I think, again, bearing in mind the privileged group who gets to work from home, I think some of these results are not surprising, but they present dignity, opportunities, and challenges. I particularly want to focus folks on isolation, which you may also think about in terms of loneliness. People are scattered in different places. And when you think about remote humanity, to me, part of what has to be in the back of our minds is the loneliness that people are feeling. Not everyone's with other people where they are, quote unquote, sheltering in place or where they are, and they feel disconnected from their teams, as the next slide will show. And then, of course, importantly, this issue of blurred lines between work life and home life. If you are sort of isolated at home trying to do work, one of my former colleagues, I think, is on the presentation today as a guest, but we were working together and the Pulse nightclub shooting happened in Orlando, Florida. It's a very traumatic event for the LGBTQ community and its allies. And if you're sort of isolated in different locations and coping with that trauma, it's a difficult thing. And we know that now too, with what's been happening since the George Floyd murder and the subsequent focus on systemic racism in this country. People are dealing with a lot when the outside world, so to speak, is blurring into the workplace, because your workplace is now your home in many cases. Some other data, this continued point about loneliness and feeling less connected, 55% in that Morning Consult survey, but at the same time, luckily people are also feeling productive somehow through it all. To the point that not everyone has the privilege of working from home, this graph, I think, gives it some life. The interesting point too is that the more recent Morning Consult data says that the share of working days spent at home is expected to triple after the COVID-19 crisis ends compared to before the pandemic hit, but it will vary across industries. And that's some of what this data shows. You can see that in the business world, you know, the prevalence of working from home is not surprisingly quite high, but it really drops down when you talk about manufacturing and retail, you know, the types of work environments that just simply can't be done from home. And that's where the dignity issues around safety become really important, and the pressure to show up while you're concerned about your own health or the health of your family. So that sort of brings us full circle to the conversation at hand. And, you know, we could probably spend all day long talking about all the different issues around how we can demonstrate some greater humanity in the remote relationships we have. But we wanted to sort of narrow it down to a few different examples and subject areas. You'll see a few screenshots at the top. I mean, no matter what news source you follow, you'll probably see something of relevance to this topic on nearly a daily basis. If we want to include them all, we would completely cover this slide and then this whole entire presentation. So the first area that I think is interesting to talk about is distance bias. Normally, when people in an office type work environment are working, there are often people who are in either like the headquarters or the home office, if you will, and then there are people in other places. And there oftentimes are issues about people who are close to the center of power and gravity, feeling well connected to those influencers, but people who are working in another office feeling less connected. Now we're in a situation where everyone's in different places and everyone is distant. And so the opportunity, I think, for leaders is to think about how do you not over tilt towards the people you were closest to before the remote working relationship really took root? And how do you have some consciousness around where the relationships are strong, so you're not simply just knee-jerking towards those who are most familiar to you. You know, we're in a situation now where, you know, people are in different places, they're in different time zones. People may be favored sort of instinctively by leaders or colleagues if they respond very quickly to emails. But we're in a situation now where people may have moved temporarily to a different time zone. They may be dealing with childcare issues and they simply can't respond that quickly. And so as a leader who is dignity conscious, I think it's important to keep in mind some of those nuances and recognizing that people need to be given a little bit of slack, a little bit of permission to maybe slow things down or work on a different schedule. I think it's a really important area to think about and not lose sight of. Don, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that one, or feel free to actually pick another one that we have listed here that particularly resonates with you, and we could just keep filling in between each other.
Well, you just read my mind, because I was just going to put a PS on what you said about the fact that some people are favored and others are not, and just the idea that the lack of connection. To go back to what Donato said in the beginning, how important it is for people to feel that connection, whether it's virtual, and certainly it can't be physical. We can't be physically close in an office space, but this idea of just acknowledging, if you're in a manager or you're in a leadership position, acknowledging how challenging it is for your workers to be at home. As Jeffrey said, many who are juggling childcare issues and all, everything that goes related to that, but also recognition. I just did a whole month-long webinar with an organization. And one of the things that came out with the employees that during this time, that they felt that the employees felt that they needed recognition for how difficult this is, how dealing with the uncertainty is making them anxious, and maybe they make mistakes, or mistakes that they would never have made if they were in an office space sharing with their colleagues. But just and giving them an opportunity, maybe at the end of every week, just have the people who are your direct reports just get together and say, what were your challenges, and we, how did you handle them, and just acknowledge how much complexity there is now in this work environment. Because that's the other thing that I wanted to say, Jeffrey, is what happens in times of uncertainty and in this instability that we're all experiencing is we tend to go into a black and white mode of thinking. But I think it's our job as leaders to try to restore that complexity to what's happening in the workspace. And part of that complexity is just acknowledging how difficult it is and recognizing for people how they're going beyond the call of duty to maintain their job and to stay connected to their work. So that was pretty much it, Jeffrey.
Hey, Donato, do you have any reactions to some of these examples, or the broader thinking around remote humanity?
Yeah, and I think that you and Donna, I think, have said it very well. Donna, my question for you is, what we've learned about loneliness is the state of relevancy, is that individuals don't feel like their stories are relevant. And in my connection with so many CEOs and leaders, why is it so difficult for them to honor the dignity of others? What are they potentially missing? Because it would seem like a very simple approach. I know when I approach people, I no longer care what they do. I care more about why they're doing it. And so I ask the question, tell me about your story. So a question to you, why is that so difficult? It seems easy, but why is it difficult?
And just sort of jump in for 1 second, I'm going to stop our screen share just so we can all appear a little bit more visibly. And I think everyone has a good view of this slide, but we'll keep talking about these issues.
Yeah, Donato, that's a question that I get asked all the time, and I want to go back to this idea of the enormous ignorance around this issue of dignity. Those of us, especially in the business community, we've spent years working on our degrees and then getting the best jobs, and so much of our work is technical. So much of our work is creating the best business plan for the best profit, outcome. And what we tend to marginalize is those skills related to keeping people happy in the workplace. We don't even think about it, because the fact is leadership is overwhelmed with so many technical issues that the idea of learning, learning about honoring dignity, you kidding me? I don't have time for that. That's what I've heard. I don't have time for that. I'll leave that to the HR people, or I'll leave that to and I say, no, you cannot. You cannot leave it to the HR people or the other managers below you. You have to do this because you have to set the tone. You have to show empathy. You have to demonstrate that you care about what's going on, especially now in the COVID-19 environment. You have to show them that you care, that their kids, also need to be educated, and that's going to invade your work time. You have to demonstrate that compassion that Donato was talking about in the beginning, and that sense of tenderness. I told him earlier, I love that word, tenderness. And somehow it gets lost. It gets lost in all of the technical things that get on us. And I just want one more thing, Donato, I want to say, these are not bad people. These are not people. Yeah.
Well, if I may just add there, I don't think the other participants heard. My favorite philosopher, Yogi Berra, once said, you don't want to make the wrong mistake. And I want to share with you, Don, a number of years ago, here I am, I think a very compassionate leader with a lot of passion and concerns. I was bullied as a child. And so I have tried to lead with compassion. But I went into my organization and I did a little bit of a survey. And I wanted to see how many people felt that they were bullied. I was shocked. 20% of the workforce came forward. And here I consider myself a leader who wraps their arms around compassionate training. And so my question to you is, do we sometimes miss the mark because we are assuming that other leaders are practicing what we believe in? And I think I shared with you before we had all the participants come onto the call, that's when we introduced the 3 T's. Tenderness first, then you get the trust, and then you can be tough in your policies. And for the participants, we trained every single leader on the 3 T's, and we started to see the ball moving. But Donna, my question to you is that I think, like what Yogi Berra once said, I think there's this assumption that because you are respecting people, you are conveying dignity to them. And yet I think it has to start at the top.
Yes.
We have to do more than just talk about it. We have to have programs. My last point, I was on a panel discussion last week. It was a discussion that was brought together by a university in Italy. You'll love this. And we had a dean of economics from Stanford and another dean from Yale, and we had other professors. And I'm going to share with you what they basically said. They said, we've learned that our place is not to make employees happy. We train our students who are going into business to make the employees effective.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll be very proud. We changed the conversation and said, this is exactly what's happening, is you're not going to get effectiveness if you don't have happiness. So does this have to start in the schools? Does it have to start in the business schools? Because when I was hearing this from the various deans, the light bulb went off. I said, we're going to have to start changing some of our curriculums. Any thought on that?
Oh my gosh, yes. And I encourage you all to look at Michael Pearson's book. He is a business ethicist, teaches at Fordham in New York. And he and many others, Manuel Guillon in Madrid, in Valencia, is written about this. I've been working with business ethicists for a very long time in trying to shift that notion of effectiveness versus, well, we like to call it well-being, you know, to enhance the well-being of people. That terminology seems to work pretty well, at least in the academic community. But they are working tirelessly to get these courses, dignity courses, in the curriculum in business schools. And I want to say the other thing about trust. Now, you mentioned trust. You said tenderness first, then trust, and then tenacity. Well, trust is interesting. Trust is like respect, because trust has to be earned. That's why your tenderness comes first, because you have to show people that you care. You have to show people that you empathize with what they're going through. You have to show people that your heart is aching when you hear the, indignities that they're suffering, either from the COVID or from some other indignity in their lives. I mean, and we don't learn this. You forget about business schools. It's nowhere. It's nowhere even in education. I'm working tirelessly with private schools to get a curriculum developed. I had some real success with that, so there's good news there. But this is, this idea of also the second thing about that you said was about making mistakes, or make the right mistakes. If you as a leader, especially in this COVID environment, can make yourself vulnerable by saying, look, I really did make a mistake here, and show people that they don't have to hide, they don't have to cover up, they don't have to pretend that they're something other than what their authentic experience is. If you make a mistake, you as a person at the top, and you say to your people, oh my gosh, I really messed up and I probably affected a lot of you here, then you know what? They're gonna trust you, because they're gonna know that it's okay to be vulnerable, and that it takes strength to be vulnerable.
And I think that's a really good overarching point for all of these issues, really, because the example that you set as a colleague, the example you set as a leader to demonstrate vulnerability, especially in a time of great uncertainty, gives people permission to speak more openly about whatever the challenge is that they're confronting in a very difficult environment. And that can mean, how they're coping with, the constant discussion about a traumatic issue in the world around us, or anything else. I mean, to me, like one of the examples we had on that slide was home self-consciousness, which is sort of around, like, you're either going to have an open conversation with your people as a leader about the challenges they're facing in the home that they're in. One of the screenshots at the top of that slide, was really getting at the point that having a home office is a privilege. Many people don't have that. Many people have multiple roommates. Many people are fighting over the kitchen table, if you even have a kitchen table, or they're self-conscious about doing a call from a bed or a park bench if they're able to go outside with a mask. And so the question becomes, how do you create space for open conversation about the shared challenges that people are having, even if it means saying, you know what, let's remember that it's okay not to turn on the video camera at all times because, you haven't gotten a haircut in 4 months, or whatever the thing is. It actually matters to people, and if we can make things a little bit more humane, a little bit easier, a little bit kinder for those around us, we create a bit of a healthier opportunity in the environment that we find ourselves in. The one other thing I just wanted to flag here was Donna made the point about communicating, and I think it's crucial. I think there are lots of creative ways to demonstrate interest in how people are doing through check-ins, or even a lot of companies do pulse surveys where you can actually say, what can we be doing differently as we go through this COVID sort of moment? And so I think there are lots of resources about those. And if people have questions about some of the items that we had on that slide, because we're going to move forward to the last portion of our program, Q&A, and just a wrap up, we'll include our email addresses. Please contact us or add a question in the Q&A in the chat. I just wanted to briefly mention that concept of honoring the dignity in workplaces other than our own, because I don't think it can be, what's the expression, overstated. I always get confused between overstated and understated, but I don't think it can be overstated to say that every one of us has an opportunity right now to acknowledge, which is one of the elements of dignity, to acknowledge and give credit to the people around us who continue to work and provide services at risk to themselves or to their families because they need to work and they have to show up, and we're relying on the services that they provide. That could be the mail carrier, it could be the people who picked up the trash outside, it could be the people that we see in the supermarket, and you could go on and on and on. And we can either acknowledge them and appreciate them, or we cannot. The choice remains with each of us to be dignity conscious, not just with the people that we work with, but the people who are putting themselves on the line to help us in our day-to-day life. And Don, I don't know if you had another thought on that, and that will lead into Q&A, but feel free if you had a perspective that you wanted to share.
No, I just love to hear what some of the comments are, and because you've said it beautifully, Jeffrey.
Great, thank you. We have a question in the chat, and Donna and Donato, I'll sort of kick this to you. And Donato is always very focused on the development of people coming up in their lives and through college. And the question is, what are things that young people can do, especially a college student, to make people feel more dignified on a day-to-day basis? Thank you, Kayla.
Well, I think that there are several things. I think that number one, and I have tried to practice this with respect to loneliness and social isolation, and many of the interns that have gone through our program at the Tramuto Foundation, we help them to understand that nobody really cares what you do in your life. What they care more about is why you do it. And they care more about the passion. And it's very interesting. What I have noticed with younger generation is that there's this sense of they want to feel, they want to belong to a certain sense of community. And I think the more that we can help them understand that community connection and taking the time to listen to stories, isn't it ironic in the most technology advanced generation that we have the United Kingdom that's appointed a minister of loneliness, that we have a significant, epidemic, with loneliness. And I think it all stems from just taking the time, and it may sound simple, But I know what we do is, we have 2 interns that are working with us this summer at the Tramuto Foundation. And we don't go to the dinner table with our cell phones. We go to the dinner table addressing a question about what someone at that dinner table may have experienced during the day, getting to know people. And I know this sounds like a very simple equation, but I'll tell you, Jeffrey, even with the CEOs that I have been working with over the last 3 months, many of them have come to me and said, listen, I had a difficult time when I was in the office connecting with people. I'm having an even more difficult time connecting with them through the phone or through Zoom. And I've asked them, have you ever just taken the time to ask them how they are doing? How they are struggling? And one of the pointers that I always convey is that assume that the person to whom you come in contact with has a worse situation than you do at that moment. And if you approach it from that mentality, that it's not about what you're going through, but it's what about they're going through. And I think that that is what we can help the younger people to change, if you will, the dynamics of how our generation missed that mark. Donna, I don't know, how would you address that?
Oh, Donato, that's lovely what you've said. And, I think the only thing I would add is that what I'm finding in my students, because I teach, the dignity model to my graduate students, and what I'm realizing is they are yearning for this information. They're yearning to learn and to understand about dignity. They want to know how to connect with their own dignity. They want to know how to treat other people with that same dignity. And they want to have a life that's meaningful. And I talk about the 3 connections: the connection to our own dignity, the dignity of others, and our connection to our work that is meaningful. And dignity-centered work and an organization that puts that consciousness up front and center, the young people love it. My students love it. And when I taught this class for the first time virtually in April, I thought, oh my gosh, nobody's going to show up. But you know what? They were there. We had to turn students away. They are hungry for this information, and I feel like it's our obligation to deliver this information to them.
And I think, what's one of the things we mentioned earlier was the connection of this work to other RFK human rights programs. And, we're so fortunate that we have a young leaders program that focuses on college age students, as well as the Speak Truth to Power program that focuses on a much broader range of young people that, seek to imbue the work that they do with concepts of dignity, because it's not something that, you turn to sort of when you're a mid-career professional. That the habits that we create earlier on really sustain us going forward. I'm just going to turn to a couple of thematic questions that are in the chat and try to do them in 90 seconds so we could show 2 last slides. One is, the intersection around dignity and inclusion and diversity. And the slide that we showed earlier, where we talk about dignity being our common denominator, is really meant to partially differentiate, if you will, concepts of inclusion and diversity and dignity. Dignity is a much broader opportunity and a much broader concept. Certainly, as Donna mentioned, there's an opportunity through a focus on honoring dignity to accept and champion the identities of all the people that exist in a collective, a workplace. And so when we think about dignity, we think of it as including inclusion and diversity, but going far beyond it to incorporate many other concepts that involve a thriving workplace, psychological safety, many of the other elements. So the opportunity when you're focused on dignity, it gets you out of the box of only talking about leveraging differences, and it allows you to celebrate what we all have in common, which is our inherent value and our worth, which is our dignity. We also received a question about measurements, and one of the things we hope to see over time through a greater focus on this work is a closure of some of those perception gaps that we talked about earlier. We would hope, as more organizations think about dignity, they're able to close some of those gaps and see higher employee engagement around many of the factors that we lay out in the dignity framework. For example, psychological safety is a measurable element, and over time and through sustained focus on the actions that you'll see from Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights in the months to come, and Donna's book will allow folks to close those gaps and see greater traction among the elements that matter for dignity. And I know we didn't get to all the questions, but we're happy to follow up. And I'm just gonna share my screen for a moment if I could before we let you all go. I wanna just highlight two things really quickly. We have an annual Ripple of Hope Gala, and I just wanted to give people a sneak peek. The notification of this, the save the date went out today, and we're so honored and so pleased to be recognizing people who are in this moment right now making a difference in our world, in our country, on the issues that matter. So you can see who they are. Mark down December 10th. We hope to see you then. More will come. We'll send you information because we have your emails now, like it or not. And then I would just say, follow us, help spread the word of this work, amplify our messages. You can see some of the things that we've written about at the bottom of the screen. They're either on our Twitter account or on our website, including a recent letter from last week from our president, Kerry Kennedy, about a renewed commitment to workplace dignity. I want to thank Donato for his support and his leadership. I want to thank Donna for her friendship and partnership in crime, if you will. And I want to thank all of you, along with the rest of the RFK Human Rights Organization, for prioritizing dignity and the opportunity to make a difference for each other in this difficult world. We can find ways through our own actions to bring about more justness and more kindness with the relationships we have.
And Jeffrey, we would be remiss if we didn't thank you. You've made a difference. Jeffrey's only been with us, what, about a year now, and you've made a difference in moving this forward. This was a vision, it was a dream. I have to tell you that Senator Kennedy has to be looking at you and so many others and saying, thank you, you're delivering on the promise to make the world a better place.
Well, can I add to that, Donato? Because I also want to thank Kerry Kennedy for doing everything that she's doing around human rights issues. And it's not just here in this country, it's all over the world. So I am just so happy to be a part of this. And I want to say thank you, Kerry Kennedy, for including me in this.
Thank you, everyone. And we look forward to continuing the conversation. Have a great rest of the day.
Make it a great day, everyone. Thank you.